Something is happening with XRP right now that most people are completely ignoring. And that's exactly what makes this moment so important because when the majority of the market is distracted or confused, that's usually when the biggest moves begin to build in the background. And if you're only watching price on the surface, you're already behind because the real signals are not loud yet. They are subtle, they are forming, and they are pointing toward a shift that could catch a lot of people off guard if they're not paying attention to what's actually developing underneath the noise. Right now, XRP is sitting in a position that doesn't look exciting at first glance. And that's exactly why most retail traders are losing interest because they are trained to chase movement, not to understand it. And this creates a very common mistake where people only pay attention when price starts moving aggressively instead of preparing before the move even begins. And this is where smart positioning happens because markets don't reward reaction, they reward anticipation. And if you look closely at XRP, what you start to notice is that the structure is not random, it is controlled, it is tightening, and it is building pressure in a way that we've seen multiple times before major expansions. What makes this situation different is not just the price itself, but the timing of everything happening around it. Because while XRP appears quiet, the broader crypto market is shifting in a way that historically leads to capital rotation. And when that rotation begins, assets that have been consolidating the longest often move the hardest because they carry the most built up energy. And XRP fits that pattern almost perfectly right now, which is why ignoring it at this stage could be a serious mistake for anyone trying to catch the next major move. Another key factor that people overlook is sentiment, because right now the sentiment around XRP is mixed. And that's actually a strong signal because markets tend to move hardest when the crowd is uncertain, not when everyone is confident. And if everyone was already convinced that XRP was about to explode, the move would likely already be priced in. But that's not the case here. And that's why this phase matters because it represents a transition period where accumulation can quietly take place without attracting too much attention. You also have to understand that XRP is not just trading on technical patterns, it is heavily influenced by external narratives. And these narratives take time to build before they impact price, which means what you're seeing now could simply be the early stage of something larger forming in the background. And by the time it becomes obvious, most of the easy gains are already gone, which is why experienced traders focus on positioning early rather than reacting late. At the same time, this doesn't mean that a move is guaranteed or that price will suddenly explode overnight because markets don't work on hype alone. They move based on liquidity, structure, and timing. But what you're seeing right now is a setup where all three of those elements are slowly aligning. And when that alignment completes, the reaction tends to be sharp and fast, leaving very little time for hesitation. So when people say it's coming, what they usually miss is that the move doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It builds, it forms, and it gives signals along the way. And right now, XRP is showing those early signals, not in an obvious way, but in a way that requires attention and understanding. And that's the difference between those who catch the move early and those who end up chasing it after it's already started. What makes this current phase even more interesting is the way XRP is behaving compared to the rest of the market. Because while many assets are either trending clearly up or clearly down, XRP is stuck in a range that looks boring. But that boredom is actually misleading because ranges are where the biggest moves are prepared, not where they happen. And this is something most traders fail to understand because they associate movement with opportunity, when in reality, the lack of movement is often where the real opportunity is quietly forming. If you study previous cycles, you'll notice a repeating pattern where XRP spends a long time compressing before making a sudden and aggressive move. And this compression phase is critical because it allows liquidity to build on both sides of the market, meaning there are positions waiting to be taken out in either direction. And when price finally breaks out, it doesn't move slowly, it moves violently because all that stored pressure gets released at once. And this is exactly the kind of environment XRP is slowly moving into right now. At the same time, you have to look at how the market reacts to small movements, because even minor pushes in price are being met with strong reactions, which tells you that there is sensitivity in the market, and sensitivity usually increases before larger moves because participants are watching closely, waiting for confirmation. And this creates a situation where once a clear direction is established, the reaction becomes amplified due to the number of people ready to act at the same time. Another layer to this is liquidity, because markets don't move just because they want to, they move to find liquidity. And when you have a prolonged consolidation like this, liquidity builds above resistance and below support, creating targets for price to move toward. And once one side gets triggered, it often leads to a chain reaction where stops are hit, positions are forced to close, and momentum accelerates rapidly. And that's why breakouts from these types of structures tend to be explosive rather than gradual. However, this is where most people get it wrong, because they assume the first move is always the real move. And that's not always true, because markets often create fake outs to trap traders before committing to the actual direction, which means patience is just as important as anticipation, because jumping too early can put you on the wrong side of the move, even if your overall idea is correct. And this is why understanding structure matters more than simply reacting to price. You also need to consider the broader context of the crypto market, because XRP does not move in isolation. And when larger assets begin to stabilize or shift direction, it creates room for altcoins to gain momentum. And XRP has historically been one of the assets that benefits the most during these transitions, especially when it has been lagging behind for an extended period of time, which is exactly the scenario you're looking at right now. So, while the surface level view might suggest that nothing is happening, the deeper reality is that a setup is forming. And setups like this don't stay quiet forever, they resolve. And when they do, the move tends to be decisive. And that's why this phase should not be ignored, even if it feels slow or uninteresting, because this is often where the foundation for the next major move is being built. Now, here is where most people completely misread what is happening with XRP, because they focus too much on price alone and ignore the behavior behind that price. And this is exactly why they get caught off guard when a move finally happens, because by the time price starts trending clearly, the smart money has already positioned itself long before the breakout becomes obvious. And what you are seeing right now is not randomness. It is controlled behavior that reflects decision making at a higher level of the market. If you look deeper into how XRP has been moving, you will notice that volatility has been compressing over time. And this matters more than most people realize, because volatility contraction is often a precursor to expansion, and expansion phases are where the real profits are made. But the problem is that contraction phases feel boring and uncertain, which causes most traders to lose focus or move on to something else. And that is exactly why these phases exist in the first place, to shake out weak attention and weak positioning before the real move begins. At the same time, you need to understand that markets are driven by liquidity, not emotion. And liquidity exists where people place their expectations, which means areas of obvious support and resistance become targets rather than barriers. And XRP has been building liquidity on both sides for a while now, which creates a situation where once price starts moving with intent, it is not just going to stop at the first level. It is likely to push through multiple zones quickly, because it is collecting liquidity along the way. And this is where acceleration begins. Another important detail is how traders are currently positioned, because when a market stays in a tight range for too long, people start placing bets on both sides, some expecting a breakout up, others expecting a breakdown. And this creates a crowded environment where both sides are vulnerable. And when one side gets taken out, it fuels the move in the opposite direction because those positions are forced to close, adding momentum to the move. And this is why breakouts from tight ranges often feel sudden and aggressive rather than gradual and controlled. What makes XRP even more interesting in this context is that it has a history of delayed reactions compared to other major assets, which means it does not always move when the rest of the market moves, but when it finally does, the move tends to be sharper and more aggressive because it is catching up to a shift that has already started elsewhere. And this lag effect creates an opportunity for those who are paying attention early because they are not relying on confirmation. They are relying on structure and timing. But here is the part you need to be careful with, because just because a setup looks strong does not mean the market will move immediately. And this is where patience becomes critical, because forcing a trade too early can lead to unnecessary losses, even if your overall idea is correct. And this is why experienced traders wait for confirmation within the structure rather than jumping in based on anticipation alone, because timing is just as important as direction. You also have to consider the psychological side of the market, because right now, a lot of people are either tired of waiting or have already moved on to other opportunities. And this creates a lack of attention around XRP, which ironically sets the stage for a move, because markets tend to move when the least number of people are expecting it, not when everyone is watching closely. And this is why periods of low excitement can often lead to high impact moves. So when you hear people saying that something big could be coming for XRP, what they are really pointing to is not just hope or hype, it is the combination of structure, liquidity, positioning, and timing all coming together in a way that has historically led to significant movement. And while nothing is guaranteed in this market, ignoring these signals completely is not a smart approach if you are trying to stay ahead instead of reacting late. Now, this is the stage where things start to get uncomfortable for most people, because the longer XRP stays in this controlled range without a clear breakout, the more frustration builds, and frustration leads to bad decisions. And bad decisions are exactly what the market feeds on, because it needs participants to be positioned incorrectly in order to create momentum in the opposite direction. And this is why you often see sudden moves happen right after a period where people lose patience, because that's when the market has successfully weakened the majority. What you need to understand is that time in the market is not neutral. It has an effect on behavior. And when price drags sideways for too long, traders begin to doubt their positions. They either exit too early or overcommit at the wrong time. And both of these reactions create liquidity. And liquidity is what drives price movement. So, what looks like nothing happening on the surface is actually a process of the market preparing itself by shifting positioning behind the scenes. And XRP right now is deep inside that phase. Another layer to this is how expectations are being shaped, because after a long period of slow movement, people start lowering their expectations. They stop expecting a big move, and that is exactly when the market becomes dangerous, because low expectations mean people are not prepared for volatility. And when volatility suddenly returns, it catches the majority off guard, forcing rapid reactions, and those reactions amplify the move far beyond what people initially expected. At the same time, you have to watch how price reacts near key levels, because even within a range, there are moments where price tests certain zones, and the reaction at those zones tells you a lot about what might come next. And right now, XRP is showing signs that it is not being rejected aggressively at lower levels, which suggests that selling pressure is not as strong as it appears on the surface. And this kind of behavior often precedes a shift in direction, because it indicates that buyers are slowly gaining control without making it obvious. But here is where you need to stay realistic because not every setup leads to an immediate breakout. And sometimes the market extends the range even longer than expected. And this is where discipline matters more than prediction. Because if you keep trying to guess the exact moment of the move without respecting the structure, you will likely end up getting caught in false starts. And this is one of the most common ways traders lose money in situations like this by being right about direction but wrong about timing. You also need to consider how external factors can influence momentum because XRP is not just a technical asset, it is heavily impacted by news, regulatory developments, and overall market sentiment. And these factors can act as catalysts that accelerate a move once the structure is already in place, which means the technical setup you are seeing now could be waiting for a trigger rather than building toward a slow and steady breakout. And when that trigger appears, the reaction could be much faster than most people expect. Another important point is that markets often move in a way that creates maximum confusion before clarity. And XRP is currently in that confusion phase where there is no clear direction, no strong trend, and no obvious signal. And this is intentional because clarity comes after positioning, not before it. And by the time the direction becomes obvious, the opportunity to enter early is already gone. And this is why understanding the current phase matters more than trying to predict the exact outcome. So instead of asking whether XRP is going to move right now, the better question is whether the conditions for a move are being built. And based on the structure, the behavior, and the positioning that is forming, it is clear that something is developing, even if it is not visible yet on the surface. And that is the key difference between reacting to the market and actually understanding it. Now, everything comes down to how you respond to this phase because information alone does not give you an advantage. Execution does. And most people fail not because they lack knowledge, but because they act emotionally when the moment actually matters. And this is exactly the type of market environment where discipline gets tested the most because there is no clear confirmation yet, no explosive move, just a slow build that requires patience and awareness. And if you cannot handle this phase properly, you will likely miss the move or enter at the worst possible time. What you need to focus on is not predicting the exact direction, but preparing for both scenarios because the market does not reward certainty, it rewards adaptability. And right now, XRP is in a position where it can move aggressively once a clear direction is established. But until that happens, forcing a bias without confirmation can put you at risk. And this is why experienced traders pay more attention to levels and reactions rather than opinions, because opinions don't move markets, liquidity does. At the same time, you need to be honest about your own approach because if you are constantly jumping in and out based on small movements, you are not trading a strategy. You are reacting to noise, and this kind of behavior will drain your capital over time, especially in a range like this where false signals are common. And this is why patience is not just a mindset, it is a practical advantage because it keeps you out of unnecessary trades while the market is still deciding its direction. Another important factor is risk management because no matter how strong a setup looks, there is always a possibility that it fails. And if you are not prepared for that, one wrong move can wipe out multiple good decisions. And this is where most people get exposed because they focus too much on potential profit and ignore potential loss. And in a market like this, that kind of imbalance can be costly, especially if the breakout does not happen the way you expect. You also have to accept that the biggest moves often happen faster than people are ready for. And once XRP decides to move, it is not going to wait for everyone to feel comfortable. It is going to move based on liquidity and momentum. And that means hesitation can cost you opportunity, but at the same time, rushing in too early can cost you capital. And balancing these two extremes is what separates experienced participants from those who constantly struggle to stay consistent. What you are seeing right now is not the move itself, it is the preparation for the move. And this preparation phase is where positioning matters the most because once the move begins, the focus shifts from analysis to execution. And by then, most of the easy opportunities are already gone, which is why understanding this phase is critical if you are trying to stay ahead instead of chasing the market after it has already started moving. So when people say it's coming, the real question is whether you are actually prepared for it, not just mentally, but strategically, because being aware of a potential move is not enough. You need a clear plan for how you are going to respond when the market finally shows its hand. And without that plan, you will likely fall into the same cycle that most traders do, reacting late, entering emotionally, and exiting under pressure. Before you go any further, take this as a reminder that everything discussed here is based on market observation and analysis, not financial advice. And the crypto market is highly volatile and unpredictable, so you should always do your own research before making any decisions and never invest more than you can afford to lose because risk is always present no matter how strong a setup may look. If you found value in this breakdown and you want to stay ahead of what's developing in the XRP market, make sure you subscribe, stay consistent, and keep your focus on understanding the market rather than chasing it. Because in this space, those who stay disciplined are the ones who last.